Michelle Brogan, and welcome to the Water Expert podcast series. At Allianz, we're committed to raising awareness about global water challenges and supporting positive change through education, innovation, and collaboration. That's why we've created the Allianz Water Hub, a platform where businesses and individuals can learn about the value of water, the risks we face, and the practical actions we can take to protect this essential resource. As part of this initiative, we're speaking to leading water experts around the world to explore the latest insights and solutions shaping our water future. Today, on the Allianz Water Expert podcast series, we'll be talking to Mina Guli, an Australian ultra runner and passionate water advocate. Mina is the founder of the Thirst Foundation, a global non-profit dedicated to raising awareness about the global water crisis and driving urgent action to solve it. Mina is widely known for running hundreds of marathons across some of the world's most water-distressed regions, using these extraordinary physical challenges to highlight the critical need for water, conservation, and sustainable solutions. In this episode, Mina will share the personal story behind her deep passion for water conservation, how her experiences sparked her dedication and inspired initiatives like the Run Blue campaign. We'll explore practical ways communities can be empowered to manage water resources sustainably, the vital role of advocacy in influencing governments and businesses, and the importance of everyday actions families can take to reduce their water footprint. Mina will also discuss the powerful impact of local efforts and why even small steps can ripple out to create meaningful global change. Welcome, Mina. I'm delighted to have you on our podcast today.
Thank you, Michelle. It's great to be here. It's great to be the first. Always nice to be the first. Always nice to be like an innovator, always think who are the leaders and then who are the fast followers. I like to be like the leaders. It's good.
Yes, definitely. And I've been looking over your background and you're such an impressive person. I can't wait to get into the conversation with you.
No expectations. Lower expectations.
Sorry, building you up. So we start with a simple question. So to begin, could you share the story of how your passion for water conservation first began and what inspired you to take on such a personal mission to address the global water crisis?
Yeah, I love the way that we start with the simple, easy questions first. Not. Okay, as you mentioned in your introduction, I grew up in Australia. I am Australian, and I grew up through a very long period of drought. We used to open up the newspapers and see the levels of our dams on the front pages and watch them perennially going down. We would have dinner table conversations about how to jerry rig some of the utilities in our home, whether it's the washing machine or whether it was, putting buckets under taps and then taking them outside to put on the gardens, or whether it was just watching the fountains in shopping centers being replaced by plastic potted plants. So I always grew up knowing that water was incredibly valuable and we didn't ever have enough of it. But so I had this in my mind, but I think the reality is that there were two aha moments which changed this water is valuable to I need to actually dedicate my life to doing something about it. The first is that I was involved in the World Economic Forum, and I was asked to moderate a conversation about water. And I got involved in the World Economic Forum because my background is actually not in water. It is in, I was a lawyer for a long time. I ran an investment fund in China. We were investing in projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I was very familiar with the commercial and economic side of the environmental and sustainability space. And my aha moment was on the stage at this World Economic Forum event, having a conversation about water. And it was that water is not only something that we see coming out of a tap, but there is water that is in absolutely everything. It is the most fundamental building block to everything we use, we buy, and we consume every single day. So just as an example, the water that went into the amazing outfit that you're wearing today, the mobile phone that you've got in your pocket, the computer that you're talking to me on today, all of the water that just this took more water to make than all the water you drink before you're 40 years old. just one outfit, just one moment in time. And then you think, like, how many other outfits do you own? How many outfits do people across the planet own? And you start to think it's not just about outfits, it's also about food, and it's about energy, and it's about all these basic building blocks that go into our supply chains. The more you realize that, and the more you realize that the water on the planet is not being replenished fast enough to support this increasing demand. And if you look at it in a commercial way and you look at like this supply demand balance and you say, well, the supplies are stable or decreasing because of the threats of climate change, and the demand is increasing because of our population, our ways of life, our demand for data and more economic support. And if you look at this mismatch, then you start to realize we not only have an environmental risk of water, we actually have a commercial, an economic, a social risk. And that this, if we continue in the way that we are, we will stop realizing that water is everything, and we will continue to treat it as if it's nothing. And that is a major commercial and economic and social risk. That was my first aha moment of, shoot, this is a lot more than just an environmental problem and just an Australia problem. The second is that, because that's an intellectual like aha moment. My second was much more of an emotional and heart connection problem. And that is that there was a moment when I realized that this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I was in the Richtersveld Desert. I was doing my first series of runs. And just to give you a bit of background, I'm not a runner. I'm not naturally good at running. I didn't grow up running. Most people meet me and they're like, oh, you must be an amazing runner. And I'm like, nah, no, so far from it. It's not funny. I find it really hard. I don't really enjoy it. I mean, look, let's face facts. Like, who enjoys running like ridiculously long distances in some of the most extreme places on the planet? It's really hard. But I do it because it's enabled me to go to the front lines of the water crisis. It's enabled me to see the stories and the challenges myself. It's enabled me to experience what it means to be literally living and breathing this every single day. And it's enabled me to also be able to show people like we can do hard things, and this is how and this is why hard things need to be done, whether it's running thousands of marathons or whether it's confronting the challenges of the water crisis. So in the midst of our first campaign, which was to run across 7 deserts on 7 continents, which I did in 7 weeks. I'm even just saying this stuff to you just sounds so surreal and crazy. And we're standing in the middle of the Richtersveld Desert. We're actually just about to try to cross over a river called the Orange River, which is a river that runs between Namibia and South Africa. Those that don't know, the Richtersveld Desert is an incredibly important, little known desert that exists in this space between Namibia and South Africa. And the idea had been that we would put the support vehicle onto a barge and push it, and it would just go across this river. When we got to the river, the local guide said to us, we've got a problem. The car is there, and he pointed out to the middle of the river. And in the middle of the river, there was the barge with our support vehicle on it, completely stuck on a sandbank. It could not go forward, could not go back. It was fundamentally stuck. And he turned around and he said to me, we have never, ever seen the river this low in our lives. And I said, is it due to drought? Is it due to climate change? And he said, no, the river is this low because it has been used primarily for agriculture upstream. It has been poorly managed. Companies upstream have been pulling water out of the river without being supervised, and this is what we're left with. And we think that for the first time, the river will no longer meet the ocean. I stood there on this riverbank and I looked around and I thought, this water is being used for the cultivation of grapes that are going to be driven across bumpy roads up to the nearest port, which was 6 to 7 hours drive away. They're going to be shipped up to the tables of people in Europe primarily. And I thought to myself, how many times have I looked at a bag of grapes and got to the ones at the bottom and they're all kind of brown and nasty and just said, yeah, nah. I thought, this is fundamentally wrong. And I think there are times in your life when you say to yourself, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? And at that exact moment, I knew that it was now, it was me, and this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life.
Wow. Yeah. Your journey led you to create the Thirst Foundation and launch the Run Blue campaign. Can you tell us about those initiatives and the impact they've had so far?
I think, can I just add one thing more to like the
Yeah.
first question, just in case the people who cut it want to put something else in instead of what I like my long-winded story.
Yeah.
Because I think that the other, one of the things that people often ask me is like, if you're not a runner, what inspired you to run or what inspired you to do this? And I think that I've never been one to sit on the sidelines. I think that it's really important that when we believe in something passionately enough that we stand up and do something about it. There's a great poem, like a great piece that was written by Theodore Roosevelt about the man in the arena, that it is not the people that sit on the sidelines, it's those of us that get in the arena, that have our faces marred by dust and sweat and blood, that are prepared to go and fail, but to fail and because they dared greatly, as opposed to sitting on the sideline and waiting for life to pass by. And I think that we are confronted in our lives by opportunities and moments when we have a choice to step into the arena or to stay sitting and waiting for someone else to take the fight. And I think that it is really important to all of us throughout our lives to be for who we are. And I think who we are gets determined not by the moments when everything is going great, but by those moments when we make that decision. I'm going to step into the arena and I'm going to do this and I'm going to live my values and I'm going to give it the best shot I possibly can. Or I'm going to sit on the couch and eat pizza and just have a great life at home, watching the world through the windows of my home. And I think it's really important, especially when we are looking at these big, bold, audacious goals like solving the global water crisis, that as many of us who are leaders, as many of us who have passion, as many of us who have expertise and intention and the capacity to make change, which honestly, all of us have all of those things. But as many of us, i.e. everybody, has the courage to step into the arena. And I think it's really important for leaders to be able to demonstrate what's possible, to show the light at the end of the tunnel, and to demonstrate that we can do hard things. It's not comfortable, it's not easy, it's hard, but we can do them, and we can do them when we work together. So for me, a lot of the part of running, a lot of the discomfort, a lot of the challenges of going to places that, are really far away, difficult, hot, freezing cold, extraordinarily physically challenging to get to, is showing the art of what is possible and demonstrating that we can do this. Okay, so you asked me about Thirst and about Run Blue. Is that right?
Yeah. What led you to create the Third Foundation and launch the Run Blue campaign? And if you can tell us about those initiatives and the impact they've had so far.
We realized very quickly that the work that we were doing in Thirst, from an educational and a movement growing perspective, was amazing and inspirational, but it wasn't enough, wasn't big enough, it wasn't fast enough, and it wasn't global enough to actually solve this global water crisis. And that was because a couple of things. First, water continued to not be on the agenda. Water was pushed either into the outskirts of what companies were doing. It wasn't prioritized, and it definitely wasn't seen as being either urgent or important. We realized very quickly that in order to solve this problem of urgency and importance, we needed to do basically three things. We needed to demonstrate that water is not an out there problem, i.e. it's not just out in supply chains. It actually has ripples that impact boardroom conversations. So we needed to find a way to bridge the gap between the out there and the in here. And, when I was running, probably best said by one of the guys, the Indigenous community leaders I met when I was running across the Simpson Desert in Australia, who said to me, Mina, decisions would be better if leaders could understand that things are different on the land. So we knew we needed to fix this disconnect. We knew we needed to break down the traditional silos, because these silos, this competition, the power mongering that existed in the water space was impeding ability of anyone to actually take physical action. And we knew that we needed to encourage business leaders to actually think bigger, bolder, and more audacious. So we needed to demonstrate the power of having these big, bold goals. So we established Run Blue Our goal was to build a radically inclusive group of companies, governments, individuals, NGOs, and people actually wanting to work together to solve this global water crisis. That it would not only think about like how do we close the gap between what's out there and what's in here, it would also start to solve the problem of saying this is not just a numbers issue, this is not just a heads issue, but it's also a hearts issue. We knew we needed to start getting people to think beyond just numbers on a page. We actually needed to get them involved in the entirety of the water challenge. And then we needed to also demonstrate this power of setting big, bold, audacious goals, that we could do the hard things that were needed to achieve them, and that we could do it when we worked together with others. And that is how Run Blue was formed. It was, we started it in 2022. It was a campaign that grew very, very quickly from an idea on a page into a real coalition of governments, companies, and organizations working together. And I've been completely inspired, honored, and privileged to have been a part of seeing the impact that we have had along the way.
Very good. Did you do much training in the lead up to your runs? Are you running every day or?
Yeah, I run almost every day, and do a lot of gym, and it's I think that it's easy for people to look at the end result of someone who does crazy stuff like this, and see, wow, that was amazing. People look at me like, wow, it's amazing that you can do this. I couldn't do it because I've got a sore knee, a sore ankle. And I'm like, yes, I have a philosophy of, hashtag, I write it down on my list, like hashtag no excuses, right? So you have a sore knee, a sore ankle, a sore whatever. I have that all the time. There's rarely a day that I go for a run and I don't have something sore, a niggle here and a niggle there. And I think, this comes back down to who we are is determined by the decisions we make when the going is hard. Do we go out the door into the rain and the cold and the wind and do our miles? Do we put the bricks in the wall? Do we do the 1%ers that are needed every single day to help us to get to our ultimate goal? And I think that once we make a deliberate decision to be that person, everything else falls into place. And if that means doing hard yards out there running, if it means going running every day even though I don't want to, if it means doing the gym, if it means like putting myself in uncomfortable positions every single day in order to achieve that goal, then I'll do it, because I understand not only what the goal is, because we must never, ever allow our goals to be confused with our purpose, but what my ultimate purpose is, which is to create and build a better world for the next generation, a world where we're not limited by our access to water, but our access to dreams. Then that is the world I want to create. And that is the thing that gets me out of bed every day, being prepared to do those hard things, being prepared to push myself, be uncomfortable, to grow in ways I never would have imagined, because all I do every single time it gets really hard is think about that goal, that mission, that ultimate purpose, and say, I am going to do this. I can do this. It's hard. I can do this, and I'm going to make this happen.
Very good. I don't think I'm going to be following in your lead, running 7 marathons across 7 continents. I think short runs are enough.
Like life is not a competition. Comparison is the thief of joy. We don't need to compare ourselves to others.
Yes.
You have the capacity to do your equivalent. Last year I ran 200 marathons in 32 countries in a year. That was my goal and my ambition, to demonstrate what it means to pull together this global community, to demonstrate that there's water challenges in every single country on the planet, and to mobilize a global group of people to step up and say, by the time we got to the steps of the UN and the opening of that first UN conference on water in almost 50 years, that like movement and momentum to say, we want you guys to take action, you decision makers, you companies, you need to take action. That was my goal, my ambition, my desire to make change. That every one of us has a role to play. Every one of us has the capacity to make change in our own way. And Michelle, in your life, you don't have to run 100 marathons, 200 marathons. You probably don't ever even have to run a marathon, because your marathon might be something completely and utterly different. Maybe it's working within Allianz. Maybe it's working with all the people who are listening to this podcast who ring up and say, Michelle, what were you interviewing that crazy person for? That she's a nutter, right? But can you help us figure out A, B, C, or D, right? That's your goal. That's your mission. That's your purpose. We all have our own. And one of the most fundamental things we can do in life is to figure out what our own purpose is and to live it.
Yeah, I think
that's the best use of our lives we can possibly have.
I think so. And definitely for me, it's this education piece of really understanding, like you're an expert, you live and breathe this every day. And a lot of the stuff you're saying, I'm hearing it for the first time. And, you know, for our listeners, I'm sure it's going to be the same. And it's about education and really understanding, you know, what the problem is and then trying to figure out, you know, what can we all do, even though, you know, it might be a small change or a small bit of support. You know, the momentum of lots of people getting in behind this topic will make a difference, I think.
Yeah. Do you understand what the water challenge really is?
I think I don't think I could answer the question and be 100% sure that I had that answer.
Okay, so if you think about water, the best way to think about it is in a market sense, right? You come from a corporate,
Yep.
you come from the corporate space, you understand like how markets work, you understand how the economy works. Think about it like a demand supply balance. Okay,
Yep.
so on the demand side, we have a growing, you know, we use water for everything. It goes into our clothing, it goes into our food, it goes into our energy. The more the population increases and the more the demand for more stuff increases, the more the demand for water goes up too, whether it's data centers, more population in cities, whether we're using more and more power to power all our electronic devices. We want to eat more meat. Meat uses a huge amount more water to produce than generic, basic vegetarian crops. All of these things mean that our demand is rapidly increasing. In fact, our demand for water is increasing at twice the rate of the population. So demand is going up very, very fast. On the supply side, the amount of water we have on the planet is stasis. It's not changing. It's the same amount of water as there was when there were dinosaurs. The problem is that a very small proportion of all the water on the planet is actually usable. And that usable amount of water is being impacted by a couple of things. So it's being impacted by by climate change, which is causing water to fall in places and in ways that we're not equipped to capture. So when water falls in flood, for example, a huge amount of it goes onto the roadways, it gets polluted and it gets pushed straight out to sea because we're not equipped to capture it. We have reservoirs that we've put in places that traditionally had enough rain to fill them. But now, because the climate is changing, rain is not falling exactly where we have the infrastructure to be able to capture it. So the supplies of water are decreasing. They're also decreasing because pollution means that not all the water, the fresh water that's available to us is able to be used. So if you look then at the supply-demand imbalance and you say demand is increasing twice the rate of the population, huge increase, and on the supply side it's increasingly constrained, then you realize that there is a gap. And forecast is that by 2030, that gap will be 40%. There will be a 40% greater demand for water than the supplies of water available. And that will have absolutely dramatic consequences. It will have dramatic consequences for supply chains. It will have dramatic consequences for communities, for societies, and fundamentally for economies. Because the amount of water we need to power our economies, to power our cities, to power our communities will not be available. How do we know that this is actually happening? Because we see it, because I've seen it with my own eyes. Even in places like the United States, where we think that there's always going to be enough water, Lake Mead, Glen Powell, there are a bunch of dams there that are increasingly getting close to something called dead pool. Dead pool means that there's not enough water in the reservoirs to actually be able to continue to produce electricity. That means that the dams have to that the whole system will get shut down, impacting supply of power across a huge part of the United States. think about like the water in rivers. We take water in rivers for granted, but the water in rivers helps to grow cotton, it helps to grow food, and it helps to power all the communities and support the communities all the way along the river. So as soon as you have areas of drought or flood, these communities, these economies all get impacted. And this is not something that's far away. In Europe, a couple of years ago, you guys went through a massive period of drought. Yeah. The Loire, the Danube, the Rhine rivers. I ran down these rivers. I ran under bridges, which should have been covered in water, and they were so dry I could run underneath them, where there were barges pushed against the side, moored on the side of these incredibly important rivers, and people were offloading tourism. People were offloading loads of goods and products because barges could no longer make it down the river. This is not some isolated example of a problem. This is a fundamental risk that we actually need to not only pay attention to, but act on now, because this is not a 100-year problem. This is a now problem with now concerns and now implications, and we need, therefore, to take action now, because failure is not, in this scenario, failure is not an option, because failure means death of people, of communities, of the environment, of supply chains, and of our entire economic infrastructure.
Okay. And is the answer water conservation, that we get better at managing our own water and using less, or is there another solution?
So out of all the water that gets used, so let's dissect this supply demand, because you're absolutely right. There are issues on both sides, and there are things that can be done on both sides. On the supply side, we can be better at capturing more water. We can be better at conservation. We can plant more forests. We can do all the things that we know to create a healthy ecosystem. Because here's the other reality. Water does not come from a tap. Yeah. Water comes from a healthy ecosystem. It's really easy when we live in places to, major cities around the world, turn on the tap, water comes out. We forget that water comes from an ecosystem. So completely, yes, agree. We need to make sure that ecosystem continues to be healthy and to thrive. On the demand side, that's on the supply side. On the demand side, it's really important that we understand where all the water is used. So approximately, and this is assumptions across the world, obviously there's variations between different countries, approximately 70% of the water on the planet is used in agriculture. 20% is used in manufacturing. Less than 10% of all the water on the planet is used in domestic consumption. So the real place that we need to start looking at how we can be more efficient on the demand side is in agriculture and in manufacturing. And it is about saying to governments and companies and investors and insurers and all these people, how do we create an ecosystem which incentivizes doing things differently, which incentivizes saying we can't keep doing things the way our parents and our grandparents did them. We have to do things differently. We have to think about things differently. And that's going to require different policies, different management practices, and ways of rethinking how we have done things before. And this is not something that can't be done. We know it can be. Companies like Grundfos have been working with data centers and communities and cities to say, how can we recycle water? How can we do things better? How can we use water more efficiently? Even when we know these data centers, for example, are huge users of water. Companies like Bayer, who is in the agricultural space, for whom water is an incredibly important part of their supply chain, have been saying, how do we across all of our crops figure out how we can reduce water use by 25% by 2030? They are one of the biggest users of water on the planet through their value chain. There are ways to find solutions, not only on this demand side, but on the supply side. Water is not an impossible problem. It's a really hard problem, but the great news is we're really smart people and we can do something about it. Every single one of us. Every single person listening to this podcast has a role to play. And we always say to people, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your role is. It doesn't matter whether you run a company, you run a household, or you just run your life. There are opportunities to put water front of mind and to really think about the decisions that you're making. And it's really easy when you think about these, like big, bold, audacious goals or big problems to say, I'm just one person, like what change can I make? But the truth is that when I started all of this, I was just one person. I was a crazy person running in the middle of the desert by myself. I have over time been joined by thousands of people across the world. It has not been easy. When I started, I had this crazy idea. I would run, we'd like close this gap between demand and supply for water by closing the gap between the out there and the in here. We would find a way to uplift the voices of the people who are on the front lines of the water crisis, to share their lived experiences, to actually create these connections that will create better decision makers. We did all of this, and I really wanted to show what it meant to be like 100% committed to doing this. So I give you an example of doing the hard things, or I give you also an example of like doing something that you expect to have a single outcome and actually goes in an entirely different direction. I set out a couple of years ago to run 100 marathons in 100 days. And it was in a whole bunch of different countries. We wanted to run on the front lines of the water crisis, and we wanted to explain to people the importance of being 100% committed to solving this problem. I ran through some incredible places, everywhere from, dried up riverbeds to communities. In one place in South Africa, where they had run, that was a township, and they had literally run out of water. And we carried these massive jugs of water on the back of a truck. I ran with them, the truck went out with them, and we handed it out to these people, these tiny kids who had stayed home from school to wait for this water to be delivered. And as we took off, we turned around and watched as fights broke out on the street because people realized that there was just not going to be enough water to go around, and a huge proportion of the community was going to go thirsty. We ran through all of this. I ran through lakes where they were so dry that there were these big hulking carcasses of boats stranded in the desert sands. But the more I ran, the more I realized that I had a problem. And the problem was that I had a huge burning pain in my hip that was just getting worse and worse. And I went from running to walking to hobbling to needing to use my walking poles to continue. And by the time we got to marathon number 62 out of 100, we all realized that I literally could not continue. And on day number 63, I went to hospital instead of going for a run. They took a scan of my hip and my leg, and they said to me, "You have a problem. You have a 15-centimeter fracture in your femur. And not only are you not going to run today, but you're not going to run the next day, or the day after, or maybe never." And I sat there and I felt my entire world go black. And I thought, I have let down the next generation of water users who are what motivate me, inspire me. I have let down all the communities of all the places that we said we would go to and the stories that we wanted to tell. I've let down my team. I've let down everyone I could possibly imagine, and I failed. And as I sat there in my wheelchair in the hospital, tears streaming down my face, my team came in, a group of people who are not environmentalists, ordinary, everyday people, and they said to me, "What we have seen shows us that this water crisis is not just your problem, it's our problem too. So today, we are going to go and take your miles for you." And day 63, while I was sitting in that wheelchair, my team went out and ran a marathon. They took made a social media post and took a little video, and they said, "Mina can't run, but we're running for her. Join us and share your story." On day 64, people came from across Cape Town, which is where we were, and joined a marathon. And on day 65, people from around the world started to run and to share their stories. And every single day after that from that day 62 all the way through to 100, more and more people from across the planet joined this movement And by the time we finished, we hadn't run 100 marathons in 100 days. We had run thousands of marathons. People in every single country around the world starting to join together and step up for change. And when I decided, because, when you fail once, why not double down and try again? And when I decided, less than a year later, still broken, still dilapidated and trying to figure out how I was going to get healthy again. When I decided and made a commitment to run 200 marathons in a year in the lead up to that UN conference on water, we did not start with one person standing and running in a desert saying we can make change. By then, we had thousands of people in over 200 countries and territories stepping up and working together. We mobilized an entire generation, community, and movement of people committed to making an impact on the planet. So whenever I hear anybody say, I am just one person, what impact can I make? I will say to them, you can make as much impact as you want to, because what this takes is heart and mind and soul. It takes a desire and a commitment to something bigger than yourself. And it takes an ability to start to bring along your first followers, your fast movers, however you talk about it, to bring your community with you. And every single one of us, I don't care who you are or where you're from, I don't care what your background is, I don't care what assets and resources you have, every single one of us has the power and the ability to make change in our own lives, in the lives of others, or of the life of this planet. And I think we must never, ever forget our own ability to drive our own future.
That's very inspiring.
Probably too long-winded. Your poor editors. Sorry.
No.
Sorry, everybody, editors.
No, it's good. It's good. It's very natural and it's passionate as well. I'll go back to the questions. What kinds of sustainable water solutions have you seen make a real difference in communities? Could you highlight any specific projects or grassroots efforts that have worked well?
I think that some of the most... Let me give you 3 examples of innovative solutions that I've seen. They're not even really innovative technological solutions, but ways in which people are coming together to solve this crisis. The first one is in Australia, we met cotton farmers who are banding together to share efficiency and to share ideas and tests that they've done to figure out how to use water more efficiently through the agricultural process of growing cotton. And they have worked together to dramatically reduce their water use. In Albania, there are communities that have banded together to protect a river called the Vjosa River. And that river has now they've been so successful that river has now become a national park. In Kenya, there are examples of where different NGOs, there's an NGO called water.org. It's a very big global NGO. And there's a local NGO called Hand in Hand. And they have supported women there to invest in and purchase water tanks that have enabled them to restart businesses and enabled them to pay down school loans for their kids and pay for their kids to go to school. The thing that I think is inspiring about all of these examples is, again, that this is not some really significant, hugely expensive technological solution. This is actually about bringing people together, about building community, about sharing information, whether it's across families or farmers or whole communities, because we know that when we work together, not only is it easier to do the hard things that are needed to solve these big problems, but also we can generate lasting change, like we've seen in Australia, in Albania, and in Kenya.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, see, Michelle, that was a short one. Oh.
Okay.
Oh, phew.
Now we'll move on to the more difficult questions.
Yeah.
How do you see the role of advocacy in addressing the water crisis? Why is it so important to engage governments and businesses? And how do you go about doing that?
Before we do that, can I just say a couple of things about the water crisis, which I think are really important?
Yes.
And maybe lessons that I've learned from some of the places I've run and things that I've seen, because I want to just frame why advocacy is important.
Yep.
I think the first thing I learned is that this water crisis is, the water crisis is worse than we realize. I've been there, I've seen it, I've realized that it is moving faster, it is much worse and much deeper than any of us can comprehend. In Uzbekistan, huge years and years of cotton production and overuse of water have drained one of what used to be one of the biggest inland oceans in the world. Used to have fishermen and agriculturalists growing crops. Fishermen would take their boats out across the ocean, and just in our lifetime, so in the last less than 30 years, they have gone from taking their boats out across the ocean to sell their wares to an absolute desert where the sands are so dry that you do not take in and the boats are just lying like carcasses stranded in those desert sands. So I could run between the boats. It was a very big reality check for this is big, this is fast, and this is happening now. I think the second thing I learned was about the power and importance of innovation, and that innovation isn't just about technology, but it's also about our willingness to adopt new ways of doing things. There's a guy that lives up on the cliff tops of the Atacama Desert. It's a place that there very rarely rains. In fact, you can meet people there who've never ever seen it rain in their entire lifetimes. And there's a guy called Hugo. His job is a fog catcher, and he read about this innovation in a magazine, and he decided he could do it. And the innovation is basically to erect massive fishing nets on the top of the cliff, and it captures the transpiration of water as little droplets in these nets. And those little droplets he uses to grow fish and tomatoes and vegetables in a place where they would never otherwise be able to get access to fresh water. You know, in a true way of this, you don't need stuff to make things better. We just need hearts, souls, and minds. And I think it's also really easy when we live in these cities or we look at these things and we go, oh, it's okay. It's a Hugo problem, or it's a fisherman in Uzbekistan problem, or someone else's problem. But it's also our problem. You know, we talked a bit about the Rhine and the Danube and the Loire rivers, which went to like some of the lowest levels they've ever been. This is not someone else's problem. This is our problem too. And it's a problem that goes vastly further than just like an environmental issue or even an economic issue. When I was in South Africa, they'd been suffering from a massive long period of drought. I met a young farmer in his early 20s, and he said to me, Mina, we have gone through this incredible drought. I'm in a really tough space. What do? I pray for rain, or I leave my farm. This is not a conversation we should be having with, 20-something-year-old young person who has a whole future in front of them. This is not just economic challenges. There are cities and communities in Turkey, which has become so pockmarked with these massive craters that you feel like you're running across a desert landscape, or like a moonscape, ultimately. And it's become so dry because of the pulling out of water from the underground, from underground resources, that they're now talking about moving entire communities and cities so that they can find different places for these people to get water. This is not, these challenges, these lessons, these real complications around us are so deep and important that we need to find better ways to solve them. And better ways to solve them is not just about numbers. There's a Nobel Peace Prize winner, Dan Kaufman, who said decisions are not made on the basis of numbers on a page, but by stories. Stories are the things that have impact. And when you talk to people on the front lines of this crisis, standing in the midst of glaciers, molten glaciers around in Tajikistan, one of the incredibly important glacial valleys on the planet, and talk to the government, and they will tell you that literally thousands of glaciers have melted again in our lifetime, and these landscapes, then which should be covered in white, are now covered in green. And we talked to like some of the local community there, and one of them said to me, Mina, please tell these decision makers directly, look around you. The time for soft language is over. We need action, and we need it now. And those are the messages that we need to bring into boardrooms and into the halls of power of government. And those are the messages they need to hear in order to drive action. So I'm telling you all of that because that is why the power of advocacy is incredibly important. It's easy for us to talk about these things here, but we need the people who make the decisions to hear and see and understand it. So I think that there's like three main reasons why this role of advocacy is important. The first one is we need to put water on the agenda. We need to make the invisible visible. We need to take the out there and we need to bring it in here. We need people to understand exactly what the local guys were saying in the mountains of Tajikistan, which is we need urgent action and we need it now. So first thing is we need to put water on the agenda. Second is we need to create this sense of urgency and importance. It can't just be on the agenda at bullet point number 10. It needs to be on the agenda at bullet point number 1. So we need to find a way to create urgency and importance. The third is to say, like, this is not someone else's problem, but it's our problem too. Water is everybody's business. And the sooner we can get decision makers to understand that, the faster we will accelerate a movement to action. So for me, the power of advocacy, the role of advocacy, the importance of it, and the importance particularly of engaging companies and governments is these three things. Water needs to be on the agenda. Water needs to be an urgent and important issue. And we need to shift from water is someone else's problem to water is my problem too. And this is particularly the case for companies and governments because they represent the greatest proportion of water users on the planet. We need them to move because no matter what we do as individuals in our homes, we will not be able to solve the problem. We need governments and we need companies to come together to help to do this too.
Okay. And is it that you want companies to do more recycling and manage their water better? Is that the impact we're looking for?
We need companies and governments to act differently across a range of different areas. So we need to improve the way that companies are using and consuming water, if that means investing in recycling or reusing water, if it means investing in ways that we can do things differently. You know, I used the example earlier about Bayer, which is looking at how do we transform the way in which water is being used and reduce our ultimate amount of water being used right across our agricultural supply chain, right? That doesn't just mean thinking about how we create new seeds. It also means how do we find ways to better plant those seeds and water those seeds and use technology to make sure that we're not overwatering our crops. How do we find a way to reduce the pests? Because every time we put pesticide on our crops, not only is it bad for us, but actually it also means that they've got to be, all of that pesticide is going to be washed off. That means contamination and pollution and also huge use of water. So how can we think about things differently? Data centers. You know, I used again the example of Grundfos earlier of saying, you know, data centers are incredibly important. There is a data center, one of the biggest data centers that is being constructed in the US at the moment is just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. It's the desert. But what they are doing is to say, how do we find a way to have zero water discharge? i.e., how do we find a way to ensure that we have a closed system of water use and we are using the water that we have as absolutely efficiently as we can? In Las Vegas, we look at it and we're like, oh, it's all green. Most of the green is fake plastic plants. It's fake plastic grass. We look at it and we say, well, you know, all of the casinos are using huge amounts of water to pump through their fountains. The fountains and the casinos have huge water recycling systems underneath them. The entire city of Las Vegas has this huge area of land called the Wash, where they naturally use trees and rocks and plants to actually clean water before it gets recycled through the entire community. There are ways that we can do things better and differently. We just need to think better and differently, and we need to think outside the box. So yes, some of this is about reducing our water consumption. Some of it is about making sure that the quality of the water that we're putting out after we've used it is better than the quality of the water that we've taken it in. Some of this is about having better accounting systems, about making sure that we manage the water and the resources better. And some of it is also about working to invest in restoration of watersheds that have been completely depleted. Ultimately, the most important thing is that we do it together, because the traditional way of doing this in silos, in one-on-one conversations and one-on-one projects has not worked. We need to do things differently. And the way that we do things differently, and all the successes that I've seen, is by mobilizing and breaking down these silos, these traditional walls that have kept us apart, and saying, how can we come together to recognize that water, our rivers, our ecosystems are much more valuable to us than all the differences that have kept us apart. And it's now a time to start to drive these bipartisan agreements, to bring companies and governments and the public sector, to bring the communities and the individuals together and say, how do we do this together?
We just discussed corporates. So in your view, what are some small but meaningful steps everyday families can take to reduce their water footprint? Are there habits or mindset shifts that really make a difference? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it's, based on everything we've talked about, it's really easy to say it's a company problem and a government problem. So I'm just not going to do anything. But the truth is that really having good habits and doing simple things can yield a huge impact. And I think at home, there are a couple of things that we can do. There's a small thing you can do every day, which is turn off the tap when you brush your teeth, and take shorter showers. Those things may feel like they're not really achieving a whole lot, but the truth is, just like making your bed in the morning reminds that you can achieve something, turning off the tap, taking shorter showers reminds you every day to value one of the things that you interact with, and that is water. Second thing is that you can reduce, reuse, or recycle clothing. We've talked about how much water goes into clothing. Just as an example, it's about equivalent to a 2-hour shower for one t-shirt. So when you look at the t-shirt and you think, I don't want that anymore, maybe think about how can you reuse or recycle that item of clothing. Super simple question to put in your own mind. And then finally, on food, I think that, we all eat every day. We need to eat every day. So, except for those that are on, like I'm not going to eat for 3 days, but yeah, most of us eat every day and we interact with food, and really taking a moment to figure out how I can reduce my food waste, whether it's writing a list. We know that science shows us that if you have a list, you buy less auxiliary items when you go to a grocery store. It also means that you reduce the cost of your grocery shop because you only buy what you need. And this is not just about the shopping part and about reducing food waste at the purchasing, but also when you are eating, to think, eat, save. Think about the food that you're putting on your plate, eat what's on your plate, and then save the leftovers for tomorrow. So those are 3 easy things you can do at home every day. Interact with water differently, turn off the tap when you brush your teeth, take a short shower. Think about what you do with your clothing, and think about what you do with your food. That's the inside the home. But we also interact with water outside the home every single day. We have a vote in how we interact with water. We have a vote not only when we come to policymakers and policy decisions at the ballot box, but we also have a vote in how we spend our money. And every single time we spend our money, we have a choice as to who we spend it with. So I encourage every single one of us to think about how we can use that vote, those dollars, that vote at the ballot box, to reward and support organizations, communities, people, or companies that are taking positive action. So I think those are 2 fundamental ways, both inside the home and outside the home, that we can really make an impact.
That is so true. Like one of the reasons, we have got in behind the whole sustainability initiative is because our customers are telling us that, they only want to buy from companies that have a good sustainability track record. And I guess, through that education piece, consumers should be looking at companies and organizations and saying, okay, well, what are you doing in water specifically? Are you managing your water well? It's not just about other environmental topics, which I know are really important as well. But when it comes to water, looking in water companies' water credentials and then not buying from them if their water credentials aren't good. And that will gain momentum. So I think definitely that's a really good call out for people listening, that, you have a decision to make when you make all of your purchases, and you can buy it from company A or you can buy it from company B. But if company A has got a good water track record and is doing all the things that you say and pushing that agenda, then you're better putting your money there than elsewhere. So that's really good
Yeah.
recommendation.
I think it's important to ask the questions, to think carefully, and then spend wisely. And in the
Yes,
past, spend wisely has been, being really careful of the money that you spend. But we have forgotten that being careful of the money you spend also means spending the money in a way that will ensure a world, a good world, a positive world for the next generation. And that means spending very, very wisely in a way that we, I think, have forgotten how to do. So I completely agree with you that the key things are ask questions, think carefully, and spend wisely.
definitely. Through your travels and advocacy, you've met people from all walks of life. Are there any personal stories that have stuck with you and influenced your work?
Yes, there
You
are a lot
probably
of
have loads of
people.
stories.
Sorry, Michelle, I have a lot of stories. I have a lot of stories because I've been incredibly fortunate enough to meet lots of people and hear their stories, witness their lives, and witness the challenges that they're facing, but also the solutions that they're working on together. And I think there are two really key things that I've learned throughout this, all the work that I've done. One is the power of stories. We've talked a little bit about that, but stories are so much more powerful, whether you're in a boardroom or talking to media, than numbers on a page. And being able to share these stories and to break the boundaries of offices and to break the boundaries of geographic separation is incredibly important when we're talking about driving change. I think the other thing I've realized from all these people that I've met is that there is this huge power of community. There is a power of community that rose up when I broke my leg and came together and said, we are stronger than any one of us. We are strong because we are all of us. There is a community that exists amongst individuals at a local level everywhere on this planet that every single day are doing their part to try to create a better world for the next generation. And all those people are incredibly inspiring, whether it's the young South African farmer I mentioned to you, who told me, Mina, what hope do I have? To pray for rain or to leave my farm? Whether it's the guide that I met in Tajikistan who tried to explain to me that like this is such an important and incredibly urgent issue that this is far beyond words and it is now about action and that failure is no longer an option. Whether it is the one of the Jordanian local or Jordanian indigenous community who said to me, Mina, these people out there, they think it, they read it, but ultimately we live it.
Yeah.
These people, the Indigenous community leader in Australia who said to me, Mina, this is, leaders, these decisions that they're making would be better if they could understand that these things are different on the land. These people, whether it's standing along the edge of the water of the Orange River in the Richtersveld Desert and seeing and witnessing with my own eyes the levels of these rivers dropping for ways and decisions that are made that are unnecessary. Women on the banks of the Aral Sea on their knees begging me to find a way to help them to bring back some commercial value so that they can look after their children because the whole of the lake, the river, the inland ocean is gone. And I think that for me, every single day, witnessing the damage that we have done to our planet and to the communities, and ultimately to the supply chains we all depend on, because these examples are not random. These are deep in the supply chains that we depend on every single day. But they're also not numbers. They're not processes that we read in a book, and they're not the stories that we read on a newspaper. They are real people living real lives in real places that we all depend on for our future. All of these people not only have a story to tell, but are an incredibly important part in us understanding what we need to do as decision makers to ensure our supply chains are resilient in a way that helps us to create a resilient future for the next generation. Because if we do not, if we continue to ignore those voices, if we continue to ignore the opportunities to change, then we have a very bleak future in front of us. And it is a future we never actually need to confront because the options for change are there. And the most important change that needs to happen in all of us is a mindset shift from this is not important, this is not urgent, and it's not going to impact me, to this thing, water, is everybody's business, including mine. And that means I need to act, I need to pay attention, and I need to do it right now.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Finally, what message would you want to leave listeners with when it comes to water, as individuals, families, or decision makers?
I think it's really important to have a couple of takeaways from this.
Yeah.
And I've loved our conversation, Michelle. So it's like hard for me to think about how do I boil all of this down into like what are the key takeaways? I think the key takeaways are, firstly, water does not come from a tap. Water comes from a healthy ecosystem. We must remember this because it must shape everything we do, everything we are, and everything about the way we act. So first, takeaway, water does not come from a tap. Water comes from healthy ecosystems. The second is that we all have a role to play. And I know that sometimes the roles we need to play are not easy. They're big. They're challenging. But we can do hard things, whether it's running hundreds of marathons at the front lines of the water crisis, or whether it's taking action, however we can, to solve this water crisis, we can do hard things. And the great news is when we do them together, those hard things become even easier. So it does not matter who you are or where you're from. Every single one of us has the power inside to make change, whether it's running your company, it's brushing your teeth, your choices every single day in the actions that you take fundamentally matter. So I think the final thing I would say to everybody, my final takeaway is no matter what you run in your life, your company, your household, or your daily decisions, I'm asking every single one of you, every single one of us, to put water front of mind. And at the end of the day, when you make that decision, not only to have water in the front of your mind, but to run blue.
Yeah. Well, water is definitely front of mind for me, and I have so enjoyed our conversation, and I've learned so much from you. I have such a better understanding of what the problem is now, and you know what action I can take myself as an individual and within my role within business to try and make a difference with water.
Yeah, I think that Michelle, I think one of the things that we also forget is not only the importance of doing these things on our own, but doing them together.
Yeah.
Someone said to me when I was in the middle of one of my runs, individually, you can make an impact. But when we work together, we truly can change the world. The power of collective action, the power of not only you doing something, but bringing your family, bringing your company, bringing your community with you is absolutely immense. We must never think that we can't because we are just one person. Every single one of us is absolutely capable of driving change at home, companies, organizations, or on the planet. And if there is anyone that stops and says no, I would encourage them to say, look at that crazy woman who started running across a desert. She's not even a runner. She had no clue what she was doing. And yet she has built the biggest global grassroots movement on water in history. We achieved billions of media impressions, and we achieved impact, change, and commitments from companies and governments around the world committing to act on water. This is fundamental, and it is a call out to every single one of us to say, don't look at what others can do. Look at what we can do. Because when we take that power within ourselves to say, this is hard, I can do hard things, it's okay to be uncomfortable, I can bring this community with me. When we really recognize that in ourselves, we change everything.
For sure, for sure. Well, let's leave it there for today, but thank you so much, and it's been a complete pleasure talking to you. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, bye.